Many people believe the key to happiness is having that huge bankroll, having that expensive yacht, that big house, and even more importantly, that title, especially that title above the doorway that says that you run the place. A lot of people believe that's true, but I met an 86-year-old man who's dying on his last days who actually has something to say about that. See, welcome back to the hustle, everybody, and welcome back to the grind. And we're all walking here in this great little area. It's a park area near my home. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. Other than today, they seem to be cutting a lot of grass. But recently I came across an old gentleman. I was in a hospital visiting a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. And I was visiting this friend, and we were chatting about how they were doing. They just came out of surgery and they were dealing with some longer term issues. And so they had a bed. They were checked into the hospital and they were dealing with some of that recovery and kind of going over some of that. They had a bed, but it was one of those rooms that was partially shared. Not a private room, semi-private, or whatever they call that, where you have the drapes in between, but you have two separate beds. And they were in such a room. They were in one of those rooms, and the curtains were rolled back. Now, this friend of mine had struck up a conversation with this older gentleman, 86 years old, was basically sitting housed right next to my friend. Well, of course, in the other bed. And over a period of, a couple of days, they got to know each other. And when I came in to visit, I got to striking up a little bit of a conversation as well with this older gentleman. And we started talking, and I was talking with my friend about, about leaving my job and the fact that now, money isn't quite there, and I certainly didn't necessarily get to reach my pinnacle, at least my potential, what I believed I had. But then in the middle of that conversation, the neighbor, the 86-year-old, actually got into the conversation, actually had some points of his own. And so he basically shared some details that really left me in awe, really left me with the perspective of how important is it to have that big title. As I spent my days in the corporate world, I saw time and time again, everybody seemed to be focusing on personal development, professional development. Why? So they could speak better, so they could advance themselves, so they could get that next job opportunity. But there's a reality. Most of those jobs just mean longer hours for the same pay, and usually just means more time away from home. More time grinding it out, more stress, more chronic issues, chronic anxieties, and things that really aren't doing your health any good. But that's what most of us end up doing. We're in the corporate world. We think that's all that matters at the time. And of course, success looks like getting that new title, a big promotion, and a paycheck, when in actuality, all we're doing is trading our time, our lives, and the quality of life. Quite often, I know when I took on senior roles, it usually meant more time away from home. Or even if I was at home, I'd get calls that would disrupt dinners, disrupt sleep, and would generally disrupt my life as a whole. And while I enjoyed my work for many years, it started to take a toll. It started to grind away on me. It started to bear down. I had gray hairs actually quite a bit earlier than I probably should have, and certainly a lot earlier than my parents did, which tells me some of the gray hairs probably came from work. But either way, I went through this job and, I was enjoying it for a while. But then, changes, organizational changes, structural changes, the conversation about performance improvements and enhancements, and, these discussions about efficiency improvements, and all the corporate lingo that keeps people constantly trying to drive forward, working harder, doubling down, doing more with less. And that whole conversation really started to really take a toll on me. I felt it impacting my health. I felt that the stress levels were higher. I felt I was more on edge. Even when I get home and I was just twitchy and nervous and agitated, and my family resonated. They saw that. They heard it. They felt it. They knew I was going through stress, and this was no way to get rid of it. Now, granted, I was let go, but the reality was, I've already mentioned and exposed the fact that I was already targeting 55, 56 was probably my age anyway, because there's no way I could have done this chronically for another 10 years. Even if the company wanted me around, it just wasn't in the cards. It wasn't good for my health. And quite honestly, I was losing interest in all of that mumbo jumbo that they used to talk in the corporate lingo. So I was getting done with it. But why do we do that in the first place? We all believe that money is everything. We all believe that even though we need money, it's the basic fundamental. That's how we survive. 100%, we need food, we need housing, we need money to do that. But how far and how much is too much? And so this conversation with this older gentleman who's 86 started to share his bit of his life story, and I was absolutely taken aback by that because, you know, he kind of asked what my friend was in for, and of course we asked what his story was, and he said he was dealing with some major issues, and sadly the last blow, the last conversation with the doctor delivered him some very, very bad news, and it didn't sound like he had a whole long time left. He was given some sort of news that just didn't sound very positive. Now, he looked at it and he said, you know, throughout his entire life, he did some amazing things. He was on a bunch of boards. He was board of directors. He was a senior member on a lot of different projects. He certainly had a lot to say to a lot of big players in industry. And it sounded like in his space, whatever that space was, he was a leader. He made money. Then it sounded like he went independent, started his own business, and really just reveled in the idea of being better, you know, being the best in his business, in his space, trying to generate, you know, the big reputation, trying to generate the big paychecks, trying to generate, you know, the money and the wealth to buy that yacht. Never mind a little water or a little ski boat, a yacht and a big house on the waterfront. So he did all these things to try to generate this perception of ultimate wealth and success. So he looked at this and he was telling us in this conversation that he had these aspirations to constantly drive higher, more, create more, and just be the best that he could possibly be. And I've always personally believed in having goals. Be the best that you can be. But at what end? See, to what end? And that's what I noticed in my job. In the corporate job I was involved with, there was a point. There was a breaking point. There's a point where it makes sense. There's a point where you can find that level of success. But there's a point of what they call diminishing returns where it doesn't really matter anymore. You put in all this extra effort and the yield really isn't there. In many cases, that's how I experience it anyhow. But this 86-year-old gentleman, so sadly with this latest bunch of news he had, he confessed in all of these years of becoming the best in his space, of becoming that master in his industry. What he failed to realize was he was giving up everything else. Everything else. He gave up two wives. He was on his third wife. So he gave up 2 wives. He gave up his relationship with 3 of his kids. They pretty much estranged him and they moved on because he just was never there. He missed birthday parties. He missed all kinds of little get-togethers. And all of those relationships that we typically like to build, he just missed out on so much of it. He said, I spent all the time at the office on phone calls, dealing with business, flipping the laptop. Even if I was at home, I wasn't at home. He was always doing something and it was work related and he was never around for his family. He could even spend a half an hour to take some time to sit with his kids to watch a TV show, one of their TV shows. He admitted that he spent way too much time focusing on his work, focusing on being the top in his space, and he made the money. He had the wealth. He found that success. But he realized later, what did success really mean to him? At the time, he believed success, everything was related directly to the size of the bank account, directly to the size of his house. And while I spoke of yesterday's video about, some things that older retirees start to regret, he started to see that. But by the time he realized that all of those big things were starting to take a toll and it was costing him his personal life, it was costing him his relationships, and it was costing him everything else that actually truly matters. He didn't really truly put 2 and 2 together, and he didn't recognize that it was those things, the simple things in life, his family, his wife, his kids, health. Those were the things that actually mattered. And while he recognized everybody knows when health is good, nobody thinks about it. When health is good, you're just on your business, you're hustling to your job. I mean, look at the grind. Look at these people all racing off to their grind. To what? To get to their next job, their next appointment, to get to their, that meeting that probably really has no real consequence in the big scheme of things. But this is what people do. I was no different. We all do this. And you have to generate revenue. You got to have a job at some level. And so go out, be successful, do the best that you can do in your 9 to 5. Do your thing, do what you do, and even seek those goals. But just remember, there's priorities out there. And if you commit to be a family person, or you that things that hold value, and when you come out in the workforce initially and you don't have that wealth, you often think, okay, I'm going to get married I'm going to start my job 20, date, get married by 30, have kids by 32. And a lot of people have these sort of timelines. And this old gentleman actually had very similar timelines. He was kind of expressing, he had all those thoughts when he started out in his career. He kind of wanted to be, basic, kind of work through a career, form a family, have a house, have a nice life. And that was sort of his basic outline. But as time goes on, people start to see that, they want other things. They start to get a taste of the finer things, if you will. The fine wine, dining, hanging, schnozzing with some of the big shots, hanging out with millionaires, billionaires. Being part of those circles means a lot to some people once you get into that. And so he started to get a taste of the fine life. But unfortunately, in doing that, he started spending all his time away from home. Now, what he openly had admitted, that while he sits in the hospital room, and it sounded like he might have been able to go home here shortly, the fact remains is he was told news that meant that he didn't have a long time left. And so now his shift in priorities changed quite dramatically. As a matter of fact, he decided that I'm going to have to stop all of this. None of this really matters. He was so much regretting life and the things and some of the decisions he made through his life that he wasn't there for his wives. He wasn't there for his children. He wasn't there when he needed to be there. Rather, he spent all those times trying to push and find that success, see that title, have that grand title. And he openly admitted, while we were discussing with him, the fact that he would, in a heartbeat, give back that 10-figure salary or bank account, give it all back, give all of that money, success, the big house, trade it for a small little humble abode with a happy family around him, if only he could get his health back. He truly said that there's only one thing that really matters. It's your health and it's your family. You might have one or two good friends in there too, because it sounded like he pretty much gave away all his friends as well. Because in trying to form a business and be sort of that type of top player in your space, quite often it means you're aggressive, you're a go-getter. And quite often, in many cases, while you build relationships, most of those business relationships are not friend relationships. They're business partners, business members, people of other organizations. And so you're building business relationships. So if you take a step out of the business, those relationships are gone. And we've spoken about how that works. We've spoken about if you work for a company, if you work for an organization and you think that you have friends, the vast majority of those people that you actually end up working with are not your friends at all. And you'll realize that, as I realized that. Once I moved on, I actually thought I had a few more friends. At the time, it felt like I did. At the time, you meet these people, you go to work, you see them in the morning and good morning, have a coffee with them, sit with them at the coffee table, at lunch break, whatever, you chit chat, and you feel like these people are kind of friends, right? We all think that those coworkers are our friends, just like this old gentleman did. He thought he had all of these great relationships around him. And while he was giving up and pushing out a lot of his personal relationships, again, his spouse and his kids, he felt somehow fulfilled by having all these relationships, all these business people around him, people in the same industry, people that were all in the like-minded people, like-minded thinkers, and people that were in the same space. They had the passion, they had the drive, and they were all in the same space doing the same thing, pulling in the same direction. So he had this belief that these were friends of his. But this is another piece where he had exposed and he had said that, well, realizing once he became ill, he had to take a step back from the business. All those people are gone. He might have had one or two visitors, but the vast majority of these people that he thought were actually kind of friends were strictly business partners, business people, networks, right? That's all they really are. And so as time went on and, realizing health wasn't the best and he was staring down the proverbial barrel, he also realized that, wait a minute, friends, a good quality friend is worth their weight in gold. Because there's very, very few real friends out there. Friends that really have your back. And when you're in the hospital room, like he even admitted, sitting in the hospital room, that's one of the surefire ways to tell who's your friend. When you're in need. And so he was in need. He wasn't well. And now, lo and behold, nobody shows up. To him, he said that tells him everything he needs to know about who his true friends are. Those that actually have your back. Those that are going to be there for you in your need. But they weren't there. And neither was his family. So now he lost his family. He lost his business relationships. And while he had a pile of money in the bank, he personally actually openly admitted that he would give it all away, every last single dime, for another 20 years on this planet. Even another 10 years on this planet. Because he realized that money isn't everything. And this effort to chase and be the best and have that title over his door clearly didn't matter an iota once he grew older and once things started going downhill. None of that actually really mattered. He did openly admit that, he was driven and he was looking for success. And I think a lot of us do. We create goals, and it's good to have those goals and objectives so that we find some success. We create a goal, we meet that goal. We create another goal, we meet that goal. And those are some of the things, the challenges. You create a challenge, you rise above, and you meet that challenge head on. And that's how people feel good. They feel rewarded in their careers, in their lives, by creating those situations where they find the challenge and they overcome that hurdle. And so he was like that, but he was especially fired up. And once he found the key to his own success, he just kept going on and on and on. So he said that was the trigger point. That was the inflection point for him, where that was, how much was too much? Well, that was. And so he realized at that point, he made his level of success. But it was a different perspective, and it was more based on, if he could say even under his breath, almost said greed. Because there's a point where it goes from, meeting the needs, beating your goals, and finding another basic goal, to driving and making everything absolutely about winning. Winning in life, winning in success, winning in business. And he admitted that was his driving, his motivating force. And I've met many people like that. I've also met many people that are successful that have managed to just put all of that other stuff slightly behind them. They know when to turn off the lights in the office. They know that we're going on a 2-week vacation with the kids and we're leaving the phone at home. They know how to turn that off, but some people don't. And sadly, this old gentleman that we met in the hospital a couple of weeks back openly admit he would trade it all. Trade all of his success, all of his money, his big cars, big houses, yacht that he just bought. He would trade it all to have a healthy relationship with his family and, of course, have his whole health back. Anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts, everybody. Please do drop a line. This is so heartbreaking when I see stories like this, because we all have those moments where We all have that expiration date. But the only thing we can do is what we do from point A to point B. And we can impact what we do in that time frame. And so maximizing, getting the best yield, is it earning the most money? You can't take that with you when you go anyway. So what's the best yield? Enjoying your days, enjoying your time. A big reason why, in fact, I'm totally content with retiring early and calling her quits. I've had the taste, I've done what I needed to do, but now, I realize there were compromises along the way, but I'm focusing more on family these days, trying to look after a little bit better on the health side of things as well. But that's the new priority. It's always been a priority, but I'm seriously saying, to me personally, that I didn't need all that noise, stress, anxiety. I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to enjoy the time with the family and my health. Anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts, everybody. Don't forget to share, like, and hey, subscribe. If you like the idea of retirement, talking about your job and transition out of that, definitely going to want to hit that subscribe button. We'll talk to each and every one of you tomorrow. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye-bye.